Hi, I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. I'm just going to start by introducing my friend Cenk Matalon. And I think I should first spell his name because it sounds like a J, but it's Cenk and
Uh-huh.
then Matalan. Is that right?
L-O-N.
Matalan.
Yeah,
Lon.
L-O-N. Yeah.
CenkMatalon.com. So Cenk I've known for many, many years, over a decade. He is a registered psychotherapist. He's done his master's to warrant that title. He works a lot with the spiritual bypass and spiritual psychocounseling, and he does individual sessions as well as group work. He has a 30-day challenge coming up. All of this can be seen on his website. And for our time together today, we're talking about a lot of things, big issues, and Cenk has come up with an amazing title to be our umbrella, which is when the refuge becomes a prison. And we'll be talking a lot about how that happens in spiritual practice and things like the shadow and spiritual bypassing.
Yeah.
So I think this is absolutely relevant material, Cenk. And I knew very little about it, although I meditated a lot, and that's where we met at a meditation center in a tradition that we were both quite intensively involved with for many years. I was really confused about the spiritual bypassing when you first told me about it, because I was in the refuge becoming a prison. I was in that prison.
Yeah.
So maybe
Yeah.
you could start, sorry, Jenk, by just saying like, what is this
Yeah. So
spiritual bypass?
I've been in that prison a long time as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm continuously vigilant about not being in it anymore. But it's really, I find it's a deepening awareness and it's almost a practice. The cessation of spiritual bypassing is itself, I find, is a practice. And so I had been a very dedicated meditator all the way till sitting 1, 2, 10-day courses for 15 years. And at one point, as you know, I left and I took refuge at a meditation center, at a Vipassana meditation center, actually. And for about 7 months, I was there. And I still got a lot from that practice. But when I left, I was really confused because I found I was a lot more sensitive now after 7 months of intense practice. And yet, I was also becoming a lot more reactive in moments. The way I see this looking back is because I was simply feeling more. I was going closer into my wounding, at the same time, not really knowing in no way whatsoever what to do with that wounding. Because in spiritual practice, we don't talk about emotional wounding, trauma, attachment patterns, codependency, healthy anger, unhealthy anger. We don't talk about any of this. And so a lot of confusion was happening for me. And then a friend of mine, when I was waiting for him to get ready one day, I was waiting for 10 minutes. So he just handed me this book by Robert Masters called Spiritual Bypassing. And I'm looking at this book page after page after page. And I'm starting to have this huge smile on my face, seeing, wow, now it's so clear. I've been doing this, I've been witnessing so many people doing this. And this is why I've been so confused because something simply didn't make sense for me.
So
Yeah.
I think that's a great intro. And I think in our talks, because we've had lots of amazing talks like this one over the years, especially the recent years.
Uh-huh.
And so I hear you saying you were much more sensitive
Yeah.
because you could feel more,
Yeah.
and you were also reactive and
Yeah.
the spiritual bypass. So for me, it's almost like a conundrum,
Mm-hmm.
because the tradition is of Vipassana is based on feeling.
Uh-huh.
So I
Yeah.
think some clarification is how do you um, deal with becoming more sensitive, which is what we would like to be,
Hmm.
then somehow we become more reactive, and somehow we also aren't feeling
Yeah.
certain things.
Unfortunately, so much of spiritual practice is about observing the different energies, the different sensations, and observing emotions. But as it turns out, what I found as well, and the psychotherapeutic method also tells this to us, that observation alone is not enough. Sometimes, in fact, to be able to feel, let's say, an emotion like anger, to be able to feel it deeply, it needs to be expressed. And around that time, I had become a client of psychotherapy, deep psychotherapy, body centered, somatic, emotionally alive psychotherapy, shadow work, the whole thing. That's what I offer now to my clients. And for about 8 months, 8 years I've been in this, and it's a continuous journey. But now when I'm working on myself, I'm taking into account not only observation into the ultimate nature of reality at the same time. So that would be an exclusively spiritual attitude, but also looking at emotions too, as if, although there's an overlap, these are completely separate undertakings, so that we are covering all the different parts of our humanity, of our being. Simply observing is not enough, and that's what I found. Um, and especially with trauma, deep emotional wounds, self-expression in a healthy setting like psychotherapy sessions, group work, I have been finding that tremendously valuable.
Right.
Actually
So,
it's complementary to spiritual practice.
so what does a spiritual bypass look? So, like, I'll just speak very briefly about my own life. Like, I had lots of experience observing
Yeah,
myself on courses or meditating or on the cushion, or I could even say in my daily life.
yeah,
And yet I was bypassing unknowingly.
uh-huh.
But I was very entrenched, this refuge becoming the prison, in this mere observation. So how does one, like I know Robert Augustus Masters talks about, how does one become aware that you're
So
bypassed?
yeah, I think the thing is to be really emotionally literate, emotionally intimate with ourselves, and becoming aware of emotions, and also allowing ourselves practice with emotional self-expression as well. It's perfectly fine, for example, to express our healthy anger to a friend of ours, for example, or a partner or a family member or someone. Because healthy anger, for example, is a big no-no in spiritual circles. Unfortunately, the word anger in Buddhist texts, traditional, especially the more traditional, the worse it gets about this topic. It's been translated, it's been made equal with the words hatred and ill will and aggression. In fact, this is completely false. Anger itself is a primary emotion about which there's nothing wrong. Without healthy anger, we don't have healthy boundaries. Because without healthy anger, we don't know how to say a simple no. When someone's coming at us, we don't know how to push a little bit to say a simple no, I don't want it. Or simple no, I don't like that. Or simple no, well, that hurts me. Please don't talk to me that way. But here's the thing, if we don't have a clear no, we cannot have a clear yes.
Mhm.
So what
See,
happens with spiritual bypassing is, in the name of being unconditionally loving or a good meditator or a nice person, in fact, this is actually our fear of hurting other people. This has nothing to do with the kind of love and compassion that is rooted in courage. This is a type of compassion and love that is rooted in fear. So when we do shadow work, we look at these things very deeply and being really honest with ourselves. But here's the thing, too. I want to mention that sooner rather than later, we all have spiritual bypassing tendencies. We all have it. It's part of the spiritual path, but let's become aware of it so that the unhealthy aspects of our spirituality, they don't come in between us and what we are seeking, or in between us and how to live relationships really healthily.
Yes. From this, there's so many ways to move forward in our conversation. And one way is because I'm hearing this, and you've mentioned trauma, you've mentioned that this is a part of the spiritual path, um, and being, true to ourselves and authentic.
Yeah.
In our other conversations, we've talked about, this, you know, wanting to be part of a community or a spiritual path,
Yeah,
and
that
the struggle of authenticity,
yeah.
when uh, you want to belong, and sometimes that need for belonging takes over, and we want to become like the good meditator, as you're describing. So
Yeah, and it's really
how
sad.
does one deal with that?
I know. I mean, it's really tragic, actually. And it's happened to me too. This suddenly we might find, oh, we have this community that understands us. And to the degree that we don't feel like we belong to the world or to other things, or we feel isolated, there's going to be a very strong pull. And we got to be very careful, because from here to cultism is just another step forward. And once our tradition, or our relationship with our tradition, starts to have cultic elements, to find healthy autonomy in that becomes very difficult. Very difficult, because there is an unhealthy belonging. We don't feel like we have the right, for example, to question authority in our tradition, or that identity of a good meditator, let's say, the good Vipassana practitioner takes over. And we wear that as a badge of honor. Look at me, I'm such a good meditator. I meditate 2 hours a day. And from that, self-righteousness, from that, a sense of moral superiority. This is the shadow of spirituality, and we got to be very careful. Very, very careful, because these traps actually become distance between us and all the other people around in the world that we are wanting to, through our spiritual practice, actually open to loving unconditionally. So, with humility and self compassion and a lot of courage and honesty, I think we all need to be looking at all this.
So, in your work, for example, say as a psychotherapist, individual or group work, again, for me, I noticed, okay, like I want that belonging. I
Yeah.
want to be part of this group. Um, I have, bypasses I'm not seeing.
Uh,
And you're saying, we want to bring these into the light, and, the desire for attachment is strong. And there's somehow an inability or an ability to unwittingly not feel, say, the fear of being authentic,
uh-huh.
and maybe losing, um, cult membership, club membership.
Totally. And of course, there can be a lot of shame around it, right? In a Buddhist path that is like, let's call it rigid, most of it actually is. But with that, and sometimes it's just called discipline. But so let's say a very disciplined, rigid Buddhist path, and everyone is expected to be this perfect little Buddha. Well, when someone starts to cry, suddenly they try to cover it up. But how about being equanimous with the fact that we are crying? Well, that's not talked about so much. Sometimes, unfortunately, the understanding is if you could be equanimous enough, you wouldn't be crying. Well, that's bullshit. That's complete. That's actually a dishonoring of one's humanity. To me, advanced spiritual realization is, how deeply am I able to cry? How deeply am I able to be human? How deeply am I able to bring my deepest spiritualization into my humanity, to the degree that these two things cannot be separated anymore? So even the distinctions between the mundane and the spiritual, at one point we need to deconstruct that one too.
Mhm.
Because what we're doing here, we are bringing the depth of spiritualization into the depth of emotional sanity, embodiment, and humanity. So to
The
me, an
other
advanced
thing,
practitioner is actually able to cry and able to cry very deeply. And they're also able to be angry when it's called for. And they're able to responsibly be angry, anger with heart, with vulnerability.
I want to ask about the how of this, because to me it sounds amazing
Yeah.
and essential, but I think there's a lot of difficulty there. And I think before going there, you also mentioned this sort of moral superiority that comes in.
Uh-huh. Which is really shame. It's shame
Yeah,
up.
so
Yeah,
I thought it would just be like to talk about that more, because that moral superiority is an armoring of sorts,
totally.
and it makes things invisible. It makes the bypass invisible. It makes the shadow invisible. So how, in your work,
Yeah.
like bringing the spiritual and the mundane in coherent
Uh-huh.
togetherness, how do
Yeah.
we deal with this? Well, I'm the meditator, but
Mhm.
that's an armoring to
You know,
not feel. Like that for me is the big conundrum here.
I understand exactly what you're saying. And so I think for us spiritually ambitious souls, and I certainly have been one of those people, um, and spiritually called for, like a deep calling inside, which is the better aspect of this. But uh, what I think the greatest humility provoking, at least, thing is to get very deeply into a relationship. If we are not partnered, for example, get very deeply into close friendships, because all of our wounding that we think meditation is going to suddenly cure or take away, all of that wounding is going to get triggered, thank God, finally, in our closest relationships so that we can see it, so that we can finally deal with it because it will surface. And in those moments, we will see to what extent our equanimity can survive those moments because it just doesn't. It doesn't survive. It goes out of the window, even for advanced practitioners, regardless of how many 10-day retreats or 20-day, whatever they've done. And so that's a really hot cave, right? So the only cave is not the meditation cave or spirituality. It's also deep, authentic relationship as a way of finding healing, growth, and transformation, and spiritual opening as well. Because when the human heart breaks, whatever spiritual realization we have can also shine through from that opening. And at that point, between the human and the spiritual, there's no difference.
Right. For me, it's like when the heart breaks, it's breaking open.
Yeah,
That's sort of the word play and the image I like.
yeah,
Without the broken heart, it's will stay constricted. Um,
exactly. And if I'm always guarded, always defensive, always shame or fear ridden in my closest relationships, then my heart is not going to get broken open. And in fact, I won't be able to love my partner deeply either because there's so much that I'm not looking at within myself. And imagine a relationship where both people are doing this kind of work on themselves. That means their spiritual practice or their relationship, the way they treat each other, can be another spiritual practice on top of all the other practices they're doing. So here, the perspective we're talking about is an expanded perspective. We're not saying don't do this, but we're saying do this as well and do that too. And don't forget about this, don't forget about that. Have you looked at this? So this is a multidimensional, integrative, holistic way of working on ourselves. It's leaving nothing out.
I'm hearing you offering a challenge
Yeah.
of embracing intimacy,
Intimacy.
and also if I can say, the incumbent suffering that comes with intimacy. And
Yeah. Yeah.
our experience, say for example, on the courses, the meditation courses, 10-day courses,
Yeah.
there's a lot of suffering
Oh,
that we can experience on the cushion in that certain way.
yeah.
And you're asking though for that same willingness or that same courage
Yeah.
in I was going to say mundane. I don't want to use mundane because it kind of is a bit diminutive.
In relationships, which
Yeah.
is all about love, right? And
Yes.
love is a spiritual virtue.
So right now for me, I'm feeling like my eyes are a little bit teary. I'm feeling the emotive challenge of what you're offering and asking.
Yeah,
Um, and for someone, as you know, who experienced developmental trauma at a very young age, there is resistance, like there is the bypass. So how, people are afraid of suffering.
totally.
People
And the
don't want to
resistance,
suffer.
yeah, even the
It's not
resistance,
welcome here.
yeah,
So how do we, and there's a certain, as we talked earlier, a noble thing about meditating
uh-huh.
that is somehow distinct and used as again, a buffering against, well, I don't need to have, these kind of relationships or get angry with others because, I'm the meditator. So how do we accept your invitation to have our hearts broken open? Like, how does that work?
So I think one thing that helps us is to notice, to become aware that our entire society is entrenched in this. We don't want to feel our pain, period.
See,
We
I
don't,
hear that and I'm like, oh, that's a lot to deal with.
yeah, we don't want to feel our pain. And what do? Endless distractions, endless. Porn is part of that, of course. It's become an epidemic today. Binge eating, binge watching, everything. And let's be very honest, in what ways am I using even my spirituality as a distraction? Let's be extremely honest about that. And then we can find our authentic spirituality. And the journey of disillusionment in that is profoundly painful. I've been through it. I've been
So,
through it and I know how difficult it is, but there's a reward on the other side. Otherwise, why do any of this, right?
so my pragmatic nature, my conditioning of pragmatism, I'm hearing this, and of course, I know from my own experience, on
Yeah.
and off the cushion, that you're absolutely correct. I know this to be correct, and I know this to be a lot of work, and it does require a lot of courage to
Yes.
face our own shame and to
And
go
there's so,
against our cultural norms.
I mean, there's so much we don't want to see in ourselves, right? And isn't that actually ultimately the goal of spiritual practice, to actually face it all? And so the thing is, when the resistance comes, we also work with resistance, and that resistance too needs to be honored and be related to compassionately. This is not about another self-torture project. Most spirituality is that. Psychotherapy isn't. So
So
the the
how do you separate that? How do you say in your work, individual or group,
yeah.
not remove that
Uh,
um, the rigor that is really self-harming
yeah.
and start to do the opposite, which, as
Uh-huh.
you're saying, most of us are conditioned to run really fast away from.
Yeah. I think at one point, when I think about why I've been doing this work on myself, why I know that you've been doing it, at one point we simply see that there is no other choice. At one point we simply see so deeply that we are running away from some things. And as long as we continue doing that, we're not going to actually heal and grow. And in fact, even our spiritualities get stunted by that. And at one point, we just go into it.
Okay, so we've covered, I think, a lot of ground so far, Cenk. So I thought this would be a really good time to just ask a clear question. What is spiritual bypassing?
Yeah. So spiritual bypassing is the use of spiritual beliefs and assumptions to ultimately deny our humanity and our emotions and our more difficult things that we would simply rather not look at. For example, maybe it's very hard for me to challenge someone, confront someone in a healthy way, that I just don't know how to do this, and maybe it was never shown to me. And I might just call this unconditional love. Oh, I'm not confronting, let's say someone is treating me badly, disrespectfully, and I'm going to frame this as, oh, because I'm being a nice person, or because that wouldn't be unconditional love. Or I say, oh, everything is one. We are all one. So maybe I abandon all my sexual boundaries and I just go into and do all kinds of things, and I call it tantra. That's another example. Well, and then someone tells me, oh, like, are you sure you want to do this? Like, is this sexual? Is this healthy sexuality for you? And then I say, well, we are all one, aren't we? In fact, what might be happening is maybe this person is being taken advantage of by people who are pushing her boundaries or his boundaries. So we are spiritualizing certain aspects of our lives and dressing them up in spiritual ideals and big perspective notions. And ultimately, we are betraying our deeper truth. But it's so rampant, it's everywhere.
So if it's rampant and everywhere, say externally and within ourselves
Yeah.
and invisible, how can we use, say, the psychotherapy and the shadow work to help bring these bypasses
Uh-huh.
into our awareness? How does
Yeah.
that work?
So I think when we get really embodied, that means we are in touch with all our emotions. We know when someone's crossing our boundary because our anger is just going to be there. If someone's crossing my boundary, and if I'm really in touch with my healthy boundaries, therefore healthy anger, my anger is going to come up to me and say, something's going on here. It will give me, it will give me a message. And our healthy anger always has a message. That means what's happening out there or what's trying to happen towards me is toxic to me and I don't want it. Maybe it's not good for me. Once we start really listening deeply to our emotions, they're messengers and they have their own wisdom. And of course, I'm not talking about everyday reactivity or rage here. I'm talking about healthy anger. And then our intuition, our inner wisdom actually telling us something about what might be happening in the situation. So, to that end, psychotherapy is a profound ally for all of us. In group work, in individual sessions, I guide my clients to get in touch with all their emotions. That means all their healthy boundaries. That means their humanity, the entirety of one's humanity, not only one part. So many of us maybe are very good at anger, but we don't know how to cry because no one has shown us as a good role model. So, or some of us, maybe it's easier for us to cry, to weep, to grieve deeply, but we don't know anything about a healthy anger. So this is a holistic approach.
So how would you say, or how would you differentiate? Because anger is a really confusing thing.
Uh-huh.
Um, and there is a tendency for it to go towards, I think what you're saying is that the rage.
Yeah, even rage, if it still has heart, rage and grief and profound vulnerability can all coexist in a loving context. So, but reactivity is different than what we're talking about here. In reactivity, we're out to get the other person. We are enemy making and we are attacking. In healthy anger, even healthy, profound rage, there is vulnerability. Our pain is open. We are being really transparent. And it is possible to be angry, even raging, with an open heart.
So in psychotherapy sessions, individual or group,
Uh-huh.
we can learn how to
We
connect
yeah, we learn how to
and
get in
how to
touch with our
express. Because it seems like this is a skill.
yes, we learn how to get in touch with our power in a healthy way. And in fact, our power is also our voice, and our voice is our self-expression. So what we're doing is we're bringing the guts and the heart together.
So this seems like some time ago in our conversation, we talked about authenticity.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And so somehow it seems like we've talked about how we can become inauthentic and how that might happen. And
Yes.
now the psychotherapy and the shadow work is giving an opportunity to find that authentic voice um, in ways that maybe have been uncomfortable or hidden from us.
Exactly. And another reason why it happens is because we've never been allowed. For so many of us, there hasn't been anyone in our lives that just said, you know what? It's okay to feel angry sometimes. You know what? It's okay to cry. It's okay to grieve deeply. Most of us have never had anyone in our lives who simply allowed us to feel how we are already feeling. So, in the topic of the shadow is we can say, the storehouse of everything that we've denied, pushed away, dissociated from in our lives, including sometimes our sense of self-worth and dignity. The more our toxic shame, our sense of worthlessness, that there's something wrong with me, is in our shadow, and it is for so many of us. That's why we're trying to find self-worth outside continuously. The more our self-worth and dignity also remains in our shadow. So what I find is that the more I work with toxic shame, the inner critic, say, worthlessness, that deep sense that I don't deserve certain things, the more I find my dignity comes out from the shadow, and I can own it, I can embody it, and self-worth, and the more sense of deserving comes, life becomes easier and life becomes more beautiful.
I've heard a couple of things new in terms of our conversation today. I've heard the toxic shame and the inner critic.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that might be new for some people. And
Uh-huh.
you talked a little bit about it just now, but I thought perhaps a little bit more. What does that mean, for example, toxic shame or the inner critic in, say,
Imagine,
relation to this
yeah,
work?
imagine an example like this. Say I'm walking in my apartment, there's not even anybody around, and I have a cup of tea on my hand, and I trip and I spill some on myself. This inner critic, the bully in our heads, will pop up and say, "Oh, you're so stupid, you can't even walk." Or something happens relationally, and suddenly the inner critic comes, "Oh, you're just such a terrible man. You're not man enough. You're weak. You're a piece of shit," or whatever, or your failure. Say something goes wrongly at work, well, this thing will come where you're such a failure, you're a bad therapist. And to the degree that we believe this bully in our heads, we actually start feeling this unworthiness inside. And sometimes it actually feels like a lot of numbness. It can feel like depression. It can take us all the way to suicide, because we feel very deeply in these moments that there's something profoundly wrong with us. It actually disconnects us from the core of our being. Toxic shame is extremely powerful, and it steals our joy. It steals our dignity and self-worth. And so much of our toxic shame is in our shadow. Because it's so painful, we have pushed it away, we have pushed it aside, and it's the last thing we want to feel. But the thing is, even that is possible to feel through, to digest, and to move beyond. But that beyond, that freedom from toxic shame, is going through the toxic shame and through exploring it. Our entire culture is completely driven by so much shame and fear. So those are also certain things that we need to look at.
It sounds then that uh, psychotherapy is giving oneself, ourselves, again, allowance
Uh-huh.
to feel precisely what we've pushed away, as you said,
Yeah.
or to feel things or to express in ways that were never modeled for us or maybe overtly told we can't do.
Hmm.
And that seems quite daunting. So I'm wondering how do we moderate that, and how does, say,
Well, we go into it,
gentleness, self-compassion?
we go into it with a lot of compassion, right? None of this can be rushed. And in fact, if we're not going in it with compassion, we actually can't go in it at all. So a lot of kindness with self, patience, this is core level material. This is big time deep stuff, right? Getting in touch with our toxic shame, patterns of guilt, all the tears we haven't cried. I mean, it's a big ordeal. And then we also find that we're in it for life. Then our ideals of our ambition of getting somewhere dissolves. And when that dissolves, what becomes really obvious is the beauty of what's already here. When that becomes apparent, we are not in a rush anymore. Because as long as we know we're on track, there's some inner peace that comes with that. As long as we know that we are doing the work that must be done, it doesn't matter how fast we do it.
Yeah, because for me, that's very provocative, because, as you said, these avoidance techniques are very prevalent in our culture. So is, I'll use the term, like boot camping. And
Uh-huh.
in many ways, I took the spiritual path as a very long boot camp, which I'm now moving in the lines of what you're talking of, the
Yeah,
compassion and gentleness. So how does one slowly start to come out of that conditioned boot camp mentality?
exactly. So that's why in my work, I'm continuously working on toxic shame with people so that their ambition to get there right away, whatever there is for them, starts to dissolve. So they can feel that already the way they are enough. They simply are enough. So they can get in touch with at least some degree of self-love and self-worth, without which this work cannot be done. So what I do in my work with people, we expose toxic shame pretty quickly with a lot of gentleness.
The thing that I really love that you said, um, in our last conversation, and you've touched on it here, about what's by saying what's already inside, getting in touch with what's already inside by taking the rush off.
Yeah.
Um, you showed me in our last conversation, it was a bit of an aha moment for me, because we've talked about the shadow. And for me, when I think shadow, I think, things in the darkness, things that I don't want.
Uh-huh.
But what I realized through my own progress, and also through our conversations, and again today, is that the things in the shadow aren't necessarily um, only you know, the toxic shame or the fear or the self-loathing. So I wonder if you could touch into that, into like the core of our being, the things that are already there when we give that compassion
For
to look.
sure. For sure. And here's the thing, here's the catch, really. As long as I'm not aware of my guilt tendencies, which is self blame, self punishment, and toxic shame, what also gets lodged into my shadow is my healthy shame. But healthy shame is my empathy. Empathy is my compassion. They're all connected. If I am so much listening to the inner critic, beating myself up with shame, self torturing with shame, the classic Christian thing, that means I'm not going to hear the deeper wisdom of my healthy shame. That means I won't be able to um, apologize from my heart. What that does is, once if I hurt someone relationally, say with edgy language, or maybe I shame somebody, I won't be able to repair that lost, broken trust. So our shadow, yes, difficult stuff is in there, but also as we explore the shadow, the diamond that we are also disconnecting, we start connecting with the gift of integration, which is healthy shame and conscience, without which empathy and love are not possible, as well as our sense of dignity, self-worth, our power that we are not really owning because maybe we don't know our healthy anger so much. There's so much in there to explore. All these emotions, they have, yes, they are not easy to look at, but at the same time, they have their incredible gifts. For example, fear, the more we work with fear, it turns to excitement, life energy. It expands our being because fear means I'm at the precipice, I'm at the edge of expansion. My being is about to expand. The more we face our fears, the more we expand. The more different things become possible for us. We end up expanding our being.
Right. I'm hearing a lot of amazing things here, and I'm going to try and keep things. I want to talk a little bit about attachment, but what I think before that is what you just said is so beautiful about bringing ourselves able to be in touch with things we may have really not wanted, but seeing them instead of things we don't want, but actually as helpful tools like fear.
Yeah, yeah.
And I just wonder if you could say a bit more about that, because that I think really will that strikes a chord for me right in this moment,
Uh-huh.
because usually fear is like I'm checking out.
Yeah.
I don't want fear. But
Yeah.
you're saying we can use fear as something very positive.
Well, I'm saying we can we can use everything as something positive because this is the path of self transformation. So we are not trying to, in the sense, we are not trying to transcend anything. We are, our goal, our attitude is, how can I work with everything? That means, how can I open to life as it is, as I'm experiencing inside, as an emotion? How can I open to it courageously and humbly and find freedom within that state? Not a kind of freedom that leaves me separate from it, dissociated from it, but through it, within it, all the way to beyond it, but without disconnecting or without denying or pushing aside as if that shouldn't be part of our lives or somehow that doesn't fit our spirituality. Fear, emotions are here to stay. That's what I found. Emotions are here to stay. They're a part of our humanity. They're not going away. What I find is the more I work with my fear, that constricted energy, like a tight hand, like this tight fist, it starts to open. And the more it opens, that tight energy inside fear, tremendous energy, it starts to expand. And it starts to expand my being, even physically speaking, because there's also rigidity in the muscles in the body. Also, it expands the mind. So all our rigid points of reference and everything, they get more transparent, easier to see, and more fluid. For example, take fear of the unknown. That fear, the more we look at that, we might find, oh, thank God for the unknown. Life is more exciting that way because ultimately there's always some kind of unknown in our lives. Once we are in touch with the beauty of that, through facing the fear of the unknown, life becomes full of mystery, but in a beautiful way, because absolutely there's no guarantee in so many ways. What's going to happen in 5 minutes? What's going to happen in 5 years or 10 years? To live with that healthy, fundamental level of unknown opens us to the mysteriousness of life itself. And in that, there's so much joy because then we are less likely to fixate on things. We are functioning from a very natural openness.
So I love hearing that, because I know one of my bypasses was absolute rigid narrowness. And I wanted unconsciously, and perhaps consciously as well, I needed that tether of certainty.
Mhm.
And that was, as then when I let go of that tether,
Yeah,
the exact experience that you just shared started to come and to embrace the mystery. And that seems like that kind of came out of the shadow, that joy came out of my shadow.
yeah,
And that's one thing you shared previously with me that was just so beautiful, that in my shadow was joy.
yes, yeah. It's incredible, isn't it? It's almost like universe is telling us what you are seeking, you're going to find inside your pain. What you're seeking, you're going to find it exactly at the core of what you don't want to feel. but that's where it's at. Like we can call it the dragon shadow or the fear or all these difficult stuff. This is the dragon that, not that we're going to slay and destroy, but the dragon whose power is ours. And once we face it, we take back our power, and we see that dragon has a lot of it's it's how can we say, it's obscuring incredibly beautiful aspects of ourselves. But by going through the dragon and facing him or her or this thing, we find the joys right there. The beautiful mystery of life is there. There's gratitude in there. There's profound opening. And take grief, for example. Loss is the last thing any of us want to feel, loss. And yet, once we feel it, it breaks the heart. And then it makes gratitude just flow naturally. And it also makes very obvious what cannot be lost. That's the spiritual gift of this emotion of grief, profoundly spiritual gift of opening of the heart through loss and through pain to the truth of existence, that everything changes. But to open to that at a human, profoundly embodied, grounded level, well, that's through the bridge of grief. And it's not through just watching it. It's actually profoundly going through it, through feeling it, all the way to feeling our entire being getting cracked open by heartache and heart pain. So emotions are so extremely profound. It's hard to say they're human and then they're spiritual as separate from them. At this place we're talking about, they are not separate at all.
I feel like when in this point of our conversation, it seems like we were talking before about what is, psychotherapy, how does it help us? And here I'm hearing like there is some dessert here. There is reward, there's payoff. It's not just going to be like, I just have to experience grief and sadness and fear. But it seems like that's like perhaps, like you said, lifetime, but maybe it starts like that. But then we have the openings that you're describing that are kind of proof that this works.
Exactly. Yeah. And those openings are so profound, they also have a profound impact on us, and in fact on our sense of self. Our sense of self keeps on shifting because we can say we're self-transforming at the same time. And even the sense of self itself becomes more and more transparent.
So I'm wondering, in the psychotherapeutic method, you've talked really articulately about the working with the inner critic and the inner shadow. Mm-hmm. How does one work once more of this joy, power, energy, brokenheartedness comes out? How does that look differently? Or how is that somehow, integrated into a more complete whole, if you will, of this dynamic process?
So how it looks differently during therapy, you mean?
Yeah, like, if we're, like, it seems like we have to have a willingness to touch into things we don't want to touch into, this inner critic, the toxic shame.
Yeah. Well, the willingness is to explore our emotions and our emotional conditioning. Let's say I don't know my anger at all. Okay, then in therapy, there's also the exploration of, in the household I grew up, how did they handle their anger? So our emotional conditioning needs to be explored as well. Maybe I can't cry at all. I can't say sorry. How about my parents? Did I witness any of that? How about the wounding between parents and I? So we look at all this. How about in culture? In my culture, what are men expected to behave like? What emotions are allowed to them? What are not allowed? For women in the household, what was allowed, what was not allowed? So through exploring our history with emotions, maybe I'm going to find out I'm actually afraid of my anger because, let's say, one of my parents used their anger in such explosive and hurtful ways that I have lost trust of my own anger. And I get really defensive if anyone gets even slightly angry with me. So through this exploration, everything becomes really clear. Then our emotional conditioning it's now out on the table and we can work with it. So in this sense, it starts to make sense very quickly why we have difficulty with certain emotions and maybe not with certain other emotions.
And is it different, say, for example, dealing with, say, I never saw joy in the household, or laughter, or love, something that may be typically called, positive emotions? Is that dealt with differently as they arise in the process?
Why usually we can say there was no joy because there was no real confrontation because no one said anything. Or maybe there was no vulnerability. It was all aggression back and forth all the time. So there was no depth. And maybe that impacted my capacity uh, to feel comfortable with open dialogue with people around me in my life. So this is how we make sense of that, right? Yeah.
It brings me back to what you were saying about saying sorry to a friend and deepening that relationship. And previously, we've talked about attachment. And,
Uh-huh.
and in the spiritual world, there's maybe this sense of this non-attachment thing. But what I'm hearing and what I'm feeling drawn to is what you're saying is we want to be attached.
Uh-huh. It's
And this
a big
work,
understanding because in those traditions, the word attachment is actually made synonymous with addiction, with profoundly unhealthy attachment. But the attachment that we don't want to throw the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, we want to be attached, but we don't want our attachment to become addiction. In fact, without healthy attachment, there's no compassion because we simply wouldn't care. We simply wouldn't care, right? So if I don't care, why would I even get angry? Why would I do anything? Why would I put any energy into it? So it's so unfortunate. Just like what happened with the word anger, the word attachment has been misunderstood. What we don't want addictive attachment, but healthy attachment. In fact, we want that to be profound and profoundly deep, but healthy. So that's what we can ask ourselves. Is my attachment healthy? And in what ways is it not? Then the exploration becomes that. And when my attachment isn't healthy, then where is it coming from within me so that I can become aware and shift into healthier versions? Without attachment, there's no compassion.
Mhm.
Of
Yeah,
course, we want to be attached.
and they seem to go together. And we talked about this process. Within this process we're describing, the self-compassion is so critical. And it
Yeah.
seems like attachment, compassion, self-compassion go walking down together towards like a healthy attachment.
Yes, with self-compassion, what we also find is we find sovereignty. We find our individual autonomy. And if we get into relationships then from that grounded feeling of this is who I am, this is what I'm looking for, these are my healthy boundaries, these are my yeses, these are my nos, and I feel empowered to speak up if someone's shaming me or whatever, then it's a lot less likely that we will get lost in unhealthy attachment patterns.
Yeah,
So the sovereignty and inner groundedness is very important.
it sounds like the sovereignty that one can gain over oneself gives oneself the courage
Uh-huh.
and awareness to make that apology, as well as to want to make that apology. And you use the phrase, well, I don't care, maybe to switch that to I do care and I'm willing to take that chance to be attached.
Yes. Exactly. I'm willing to take that chance because otherwise life is quite lonely, and then we are getting numbed. We are not feeling so much. So in that sense, attachment means I care. If I'm not attached, I'm not going to be impacted by what the other person is feeling. Well, guess what? That means there's no empathy. That means I am not really resonating what the other person is feeling, right? So we definitely don't want to push away attachment as if it's a bad thing.
So how then? So when I think what you said there was extremely poignant. So it seems like a lot of the psychotherapeutic work is about feeling what we don't want to feel.
Exactly. And making sense of our wounding that comes from early life. Because that wounding, and if we're not, there's a squirrel, there's a squirrel just, if that wounding is not eliminated and worked with, that wounding that we carry, with or without knowing so much, usually unconscious, becomes actually the distance between us and the people close to us. So with psychotherapy, we do something that doesn't exist at all in spiritual practice. We actually explore our early life history, our attachment wounding from parents, from early experiences, say with teachers, with best friends, the first breakup, the second breakup. We go into exploring all that, cultural patterns, society's messages that we internalized, all the times that we got shamed by adults as a children that we internalize, now we carry as the inner critic inside. So all that exploration is so profound and is so empowering and is so humbling. This is the gift of psychotherapy to spirituality. That's what I have found.
It
And
also seems when that work is explored,
yeah.
as you describe, and I'm comfortable with my shame or with my joy or with my anger,
Uh-huh.
and I'm willing to take a chance and apologize
Uh-huh.
to another, to a friend, to have that vulnerability
Yeah.
somehow through the work that you're describing. I'm, and because I'm in touch with myself in a different way because of the work, I can somehow be more connected to the other person's feelings and be okay with it in interrelationship.
Exactly, because the more I'm okay with my emotion, when the same emotion comes in someone else, I'll be able to be more okay with them instead of giving them the sense that in so many words or maybe with a look that just because they are feeling something that there's something wrong with them. But I cannot do that if I don't know that same emotion within myself. So in fact, this makes us more compassionate, a little more patient with people, more humble, more deeply in touch with our own emotions, which increases our capacity to be with the difficult states of the other person, which they will probably feel as love and care. Because if love and care is not this, what is it really?
Could you speak a little bit more about what is love and care? Because I think that was very beautiful. And I think, we've talked about, spiritual practice, meditation retreats, and now we're into the real world here,
Uh-huh.
interpersonal spirituality, holistic spirituality.
Yeah.
And I think if you could just share, I would love to hear a little bit more of what you were just saying.
Yeah. I mean, to me, the whole journey, let's just call it journey or the present moment, mystery, craziness, madness, that's so deep and beautiful and also very difficult at times. It's all about love and wisdom. So, in a way that maybe cannot be separated and definitely cannot be separated the more deeply we dive into both. So, in that sense, love to me is people closest to me. Am I willing to listen to them when they're going through something difficult? And that means as I'm listening to them, sharing difficult things, I need to be able to stay in myself in a grounded way as much as possible. Let's say in a romantic relationship, if both people are practicing this, then they're both giving They're both giving their heart to the other, especially in moments of when the other is in distress. That means they are cultivating this capacity to deeply listen. But if I have a lot that I haven't looked at within myself, I won't be able to just hold my wounding on the side and show up with love and care to someone very close to me. I need to be able to know what my wounding is, hold it to the side in a protective and connected place so that I can also open. And in fact, during conflict in relationships, many relationships end because either there's no conflict, that means no one's speaking up, terrible thing to do, or there's conflict all the time, that means we are not going deep enough to be able to at least have some emotional connection, because that's what at the end resolves the conflict, the emotional connection. So even especially in the moments of conflict, am I able to just put even a little bit, we're not looking to be saints here, just a little bit, so that at least I can feel what, say, my best friend, family member, or girlfriend is feeling or might be feeling, instead of um, dramatizing what we might be feeling, or trying to control them, manipulate them, or suddenly shutting down. So the more we explore all these patterns, it's not easy to look at, but the more we become capable of healthy conflict, the kind of conflict that actually deepens our relationships. Because conflict means there's a misunderstanding, but can we stay with it? Can we stay in the fire of it so that that fire can illuminate what's happening? Just like the fire of healthy anger with vulnerability can actually illuminate what's happening like a torch. And when there's light in the room, then we can see what we're not wanting to see. We can own, humble ourselves, and deepen our experience of life, not only personally, but relationally. And we cannot do any of this if we're not intimate with our emotions. That's why this emotional intimacy is such at the core of this work.
Mhm. Yes, it seems a reiterative invitation to feel what we typically have been conditioned not to want to feel.
Yeah.
Um, and you said something, I mean, you said a lot of amazing things there that I want to touch into. You said a very important word, uh, if I can stay grounded or in my ground. And I thought that would be worth a little bit more exploration or discussion on your part to, like, what does that mean to remain grounded? Like, rather than say remain frozen in like a conflict situation. What does that mean to remain grounded?
Exactly. Imagine someone in front of me is having a heart attack or difficulty breathing. If I want to be able to be of service to call 911, I cannot get lost in my fear or my anxiety about what's happening to them, for example. I need to be at least somewhat centered within my own being so that I can, in a healthy way, address the situation, address what's happening. And again, what grounds us tremendously is getting more embodied. And a huge part of that is becoming more intimate with our emotions, because the emotions are felt in the body. Yeah, for me, the opposite of grounding is frozenness, yes, but at the same time, dissociation, not feeling, so numbness, as well as living up in here. And there's so much of that in our culture. Our culture is based on distraction, self-numbing, addiction, living up here. But once we get in touch with all our emotions, and all our emotions, not one or two, I find that that's tremendously helpful.
Yes. So I'm really glad you mentioned this part
Yeah.
because I feel our culture is very this driven.
Oh, so much. And it's so tragic.
So in psychotherapy, how do we drop? I'll just say like, or from here and ground ourselves in this embodied way. How do we make that drop?
Yeah. So, because it's so easy to continuously think about the details of what happened in a situation for us. So what I do with the client is I might invite them to do a role play. During the role play, the thing is so spontaneous that, in fact, they cannot be in their heads. They are embodied, especially when I tell them sometimes, okay, exaggerate, move your arms, say that a little louder, make fists, or maybe I can give them, I might give them practices. Okay, say this a little more, make yourself big. So as much as possible, the practice is somatic. The practice is emotion focused. So um, it's not cognitive based, or we can say it's not only intellectual, it's profoundly embodied. And I think that's where uh, shifts happen. A lot of shifts can happen. One, we can say with some guidance and help in therapy, maybe not right away, but after a while, once we can roar with anger coming all the way from the gut, that's an extremely empowering thing to feel, extremely empowering. And sometimes, say, trauma survivor, maybe after some time getting used to this kind of work, they might be facing their abuser with the help of a therapist in the therapy room in a role play. Of course, the person is not there in real life. In a safe setting like this, once they get to say, you did this to me, with all their power and all their might, they get to access the pain of what was taken from them in those moments. And with that comes tremendous grief. But to be able, and then there's a lot of huge relief because that pain is now getting digested and healed. But we cannot go there if we're not feeling secure enough within ourselves and empowered enough. So here's the gift of anger, profound empowerment, because then it comes from the gut area, embodied, grounded. It travels all the way here to the heart where the wounding is. It gets expressed through the throat, open. So that means it's whole bodied healing. It's not only one part of our body, and that's the work I love. It's so holistic, it's so full spectrum.
Mhm. It seems like early on today we talked about authenticity and how that authenticity can get lost.
Uh-huh.
And it seems that this process is a way to be authentic.
Totally. It's a complete reclaiming of our voice, of our power in a safe setting. Safe, respectful, compassionate setting.
And
Mhm.
where does the ability within this process of the boundary setting come in terms of authenticity, in terms of um, being able to apologize or get angry with a loved one? Where does that fit in? Or someone getting angry at us and having that authentic, as you're saying, the process moving up, the grief, the heart, the power. How do the boundaries fit in there?
So what I find is when we're connected with all our emotions, when someone crosses our boundary, it gets registered right away. We simply know it. Emotionally, energetically, we feel it. So because we feel it, then we can address it. If I cross someone else's boundary, my healthy shame, my conscience is going to go, maybe with your mom last night, maybe you were a little too loud on the phone. Or maybe when you said this, maybe she got hurt. That subtle, loving voice is going to remind me, oh, take a look at this. And then maybe I'm going to decide the next day to ask her, hey, I'm kind of thinking like, then maybe if she says yes, then I can apologize, or I can go straight up, say, I'm sorry I talk like this. So again, it's our heart. Our heart is going to tell us, our emotions are going to tell us what's happening. So this is how we work with emotions. If someone crosses my boundary, my healthy anger might come up and give me that message. If I cross someone else's boundary, I disrespect them, hurt them, my healthy shame is going to be right there. But if I'm not deeply listening to myself, if I'm not intimate with my emotions, I won't be able to hear them, these messages. because we are disconnected from our depths. And then we might do things that we'll really regret later.
I really like the word of you use disconnected. For me, it seems also this work is about connection.
Profoundly about connection to oneself and to other people.
And with that connection comes the possibility of grief and loss and joy. And it seems like this process gives us the skills to have those perhaps contradictory emotions held simultaneously.
Exactly. And they only seem contradictory, but they are actually not. And so we are opening to the entirety of our experience in the present moment. Not only one part, not only what we deem as spiritual, right? The higher consciousness, the light and love, all that, but we are opening to life as it is with all its levels and dimensions, all of it. Nothing left out. And at least the attitude is like that in the inner work. So that means our perspective is opening to life as it is, inside and outside, without trying to hold one part to the expense of other parts, which creates spiritual bypassing. And the parts that we push away becomes our shadow. We exile, we neglect, we dissociate from those parts. And unfortunately, for so many spiritual people, their body has also become something they have dissociated from, especially if they also have trauma and they have used their spiritual practice to also leave behind and maybe, let's say, rise above all these difficult pockets of pain and difficulty that they carry and all the wounding. But what we find as healthy spirituality is not a rising above, it's an arrival into what's already here, what's always been here, what can be here, regardless of what we're feeling, and what is alive inside every emotion. What we call spirit, there is only one spirit, and it's not against anything. That one spirit, in the sense it's all inclusive, that one spirit is also all our emotions, it's also all our wounding. It's not like we're trying to reach this and not that. There's only that one thing we are all seeking.
So, and that one thing is then why you said those emotions are actually not contradictory.
Exactly. They only seem contradictory because we have been programmed and conditioned to push them away. And in fact, we also buy into spiritual paths that say the end of suffering, enlightenment, all of this. And then we think somehow there's a place where pain doesn't exist. That's not true. Suffering is a dramatization of pain. Suffering, the way I see it, is pain gone to head. Pain and dramatization of pain. Once this gets embodied inside, there's also only pain. There's pain and there is wise living. That's all. But pain is a part of reality. Pain is not going away. As long as we're alive, pain is part of this journey. But suffering can end, and that's, I think, the gift of psycho spiritual approach. Suffering can come to an end. That means we can learn not to get lost in our pain, not to get lost in our emotions, at the same time, not getting disconnected from them. So we are finding the space where pain is seen as part of life and not like a problem in the system, an error in the game, so to speak, a glitch in the matrix. There is no glitch in the matrix. So like there's no error here.
And this is where psychotherapy can bring
The psycho-spiritual approach, yes.
psycho-spiritual approach.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
Hmm.
And I know, from our conversations, you have embodied that practice within yourself. And it's been really beautiful to watch that and participate in certain ways and benefit from that.
Uh-huh. Thanks. And yeah, I mean, in short, this approach is how can we bring together the guts, that means courage, aliveness, life energy, healthy anger, self-worth, say, and how can we bring that together with heart, which is sensitivity, connection with all the emotions, self-compassion, love for other people, being vulnerable and humble, and how can we bring together also the head, which is clarity, perspective. In some spiritual traditions, the head is really open. There's spaciousness, there's all kinds of things, the emptiness, nothingness, whatever. But in relationships, um, people can simply just not apologize, or they cannot say a simple no, because there's so much happening that they're not looking at an emotional wounding level. There's so much of their psyche, let's say, it's actually blocked. It's not even open to the light of their spiritual realization. So here we are including in our perspective everything that we can work on.
Well, I think I'd just like to say thanks, Cenk, because you have offered such a holistic vision of psychotherapy where everything is included, all aspects of ourselves are there. And I think that that can only be a benefit.
Thank you. Yes, because life includes that all, right? In life, it's all already included. In fact, the way I see this path is we are aligning with what life already is. Life has already included in our being all these emotions. Pain is part of life, so we are opening to life really as it is. And then there is a healthy transcendence that happens with that. But this is the kind of transcendence that includes. It doesn't leave, it doesn't exclude anything. Everything is included in that. Even like things like activism is included in that. Working on trauma is included in that. Having compassion for people's suffering is included in that. And we're not trying to spiritualize and lift off and go off to states that are actually dissociated. Everything is grounded, everything is made humble and human, as well as this profound empowerment also with healthy boundaries. In that sense, we don't go walking around as if everything is okay. We very deeply feel for the world and other people, and we don't deny profound intergenerational suffering, for example, or the wounds around racism, sexism, the whole thing. We don't deny it all. We actually open to it all so much. We open to it as so much that none of it becomes a problem anymore. It's seen as part of life, and we end up simply doing what we can. So, no bypassing in that. We're not saying, oh, it's their karma and all this. Let them be. If we are able to help people, of course we do that. And without thinking that we need to take that on as a burden or as a should. It all needs to come very naturally. But we are not trying to spiritually bypass not only our suffering inside or loved ones around us, but also the suffering in the world. Right? The compassion of the Buddha, the scriptures say that because he is in touch with the suffering of all beings. And I find that tremendously beautiful. But at the same time, if we are feeling so much for other people, how can we sanely navigate all that suffering that we feel so that we don't get burnt out just because we care so much?
Mhm.
And that is about with healthy boundaries.
Yes.
When we have profoundly healthy boundaries with people around us, right? You've been experimenting with this too. We simply don't burn out because we don't overgive. We are respectful to our own capacity to give. And we rest when we have to rest. And we say no when we have to say no.
Right. It sounds like what we hear in our 10-day courses, know thyself. This is a path of knowing thyself in a whole way that you're describing.
Yeah. And it's so humbling to be aware of our own limitations. And I think at that point, our limitations are no longer limitations. It's just part of life again. It's not seen in a negative sense, negative connotation. It's part of this beautiful expression of everything as this. And at that point, we can't even say, I have a body. We can't even say, I am in a body, as if what I am and the body are separate. I am the body. And also, I am. That sense of beingness is there. What we truly are, who we truly are, is making an expression, is expressing itself directly as this body, which cannot be separated from who we truly are.
Mhm.
So, spirit in flesh, but not even that, spirit as flesh. And then we can say there is only spirit, all of it. But without any bypassing, without any dissociation. And this profound journey of disillusionment, I think, brings a very natural joy, a natural joy that is not burdened with ideals of enlightenment right now, ideals of I have to get enlightened somehow as a badge of honor. So I think what's been happening for me, I'm still meditating, and it's deepening so much more since I've been working with emotions, shadow, the whole thing, trauma. So they've been in my life, they've been helping these two things. They've been intertwined and completing each other. When what's happening is I'm finding such a deeper spirituality. Now everything is getting almost immersed in feelings of devotion. The emotional, I was thinking about this the emotional, let's say either trying to get rid of emotion, which is also being emotional because we are still fixated on getting rid of the emotion, or actually getting lost in emotion. So this emotional life ends up becoming the devotional life because we are bringing our own pain into our heart. Well, that heart starts to crack. And then the devotional quality of life, the gratitude, joy that's actually in every moment. Sometimes we don't see it. That reveals itself. So that devotional life is very much possible. But devotional chanting itself is not enough. Once we also bring that devotion into all our past, all the different parts of ourselves, all the younger parts that are desperately wanting to be healed, our trauma and everything, then the real devotion comes forth, flowing from the simple experience of the present moment. That's what I've been finding, and it's just a beautiful journey.
Yes, it sounds like a beautiful journey.
Yeah.
And I would just like to thank you so much for this conversation
Thank
and
you.
our time today and before,
Hmm.
and looking forward to more in the future. You have become a role model of wholeness, and I feel a lot of gratitude
Thank you. Yeah.
towards you for that, and also for asking me to be part of this conversation.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Yeah, this has been amazing. All the things that we've been talking about, and it's great to get to
Yes.
do it in a way that can benefit other people.
Hmm. The
Yeah.
devotion.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Cenk.
Okay. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.